All right, welcome. This is the Front Row Podcast. I'm excited. This is Coach Mark Gottfried. I keep saying every time I do one of these that I'm having an absolute blast. And today I'm really fired up because I've got probably one of the best ever broadcasters, and I say that sincerely from the bottom of my heart, Tim Brando. He's been with Fox, he's been on SportsCenter, he's been on CBS, it's NFL, it's college basketball, it's college football. It'd take me an hour to read off your whole resume, but even an audition for the Wheel of Fortune. How about that? So anyway, I'm excited to have Timmy B, and we go way back. I played basketball at Alabama in the mid-'80s, and actually Tim Brando was calling some games. Would that have been, Tim, on what would that have been like? It wasn't Sports South back then, was it? Raycom? What was it? What would that have been called?
No, it was Jefferson Pilot, which was in fact Raycom. They were together, the old Jefferson Pilot games. And Mark, when you were playing, I was also at that period. I started freelancing with ESPN in '85. Mm-hmm. So your team that went as far as it did, only to get knocked out in the Sweet 16. Poor Wimp, and you guys couldn't get past 16, but you got there 4 straight times.
That's it.
I mean, 4 straight times. But I was working at ESPN. I did some games of yours on ESPN too. I had been doing the Raycom and Jefferson Pilot stuff since '83, and a lot of it was Metro Conference games back when Keith Lee and Doom Haynes and Baskerville Holmes and all those guys were playing, Andre Turner. And then I got my big break, and we'll get into some of this I know later, but I got my big break in January of '85 when some of those tapes got out, and I got a chance to work with Dickie V on a Duke Virginia game in January of '85. But I really got the first opportunity to put stuff on tape of my college basketball with Dale Brown and LSU's Tiger Vision, which was a pay-per-view cable outlet. Right when cable was coming in, and we were having these big boxes sent to our home, and you could get pay-per-view with it. And there were new cable channels popping up, and their athletic director at the time, Bob Broadhead, he was way ahead of his time. Think about it. We got networks now named after conferences, and LSU had their own channel, their own cable channel statewide in 1982. That's 41 years ago. And that really gave me an opportunity at a very early age to get a lot of things, probably bypass having to move up from a market like Baton Rouge to a bigger market, to a major market, maybe to move up. And it also allowed me to stay home in Louisiana because the local CBS affiliate and the radio stations I worked for before that were happy to have the voice of the Tigers on football to be on their channel. So they gave me a kind of freedom that most local television guys would not get, right. And that was very, very beneficial to me. But yeah, I got a lot of your games back in those days and remember it well. And when I thought about you when you were coaching, to work with you as a coach, also calling some of your games, some of your biggest wins as a coach, I had a chance to broadcast, and that was a thrill. But to see players, I'm now calling games of the grandchildren of stars that I once called games for. Now that is crazy, isn't it? That's crazy.
That's nuts.
And but I love it, and I don't. I'm going to do it for at least another 3 years. Fox signed me to three more years before this football season just started. So that'll get me past the 40-year mark in the business nationally. It'll get me to age 70, which is something I had sort of circled that I wanted to at least get that far, have a career that lasted that long. And then after that, I've dropped 50 pounds this year before the season started, and I feel 100% better than I used to. And, until I get tired of the travel, until I get tired of going to a plane and having to connect and wherever, I love it a lot. I love what I do, and I think it shows. And that's one of the reasons I've managed to work this long for 4 different networks. I did 3 years at Turner between the time I was at ESPN And Fox, I learned a lot of basketball doing the NBA in those years and doing Lenny Wilkins' team. I did about 60 games a year with the Hawks back in the mid 90s. So, and then when Jordan returned the second time, and when Olajuwon and Kenny Smith and all those guys had it going on in the mid 80s while he was gone, and Shaq had come into the league, I was getting to do those games. So it was, and I did the Braves. I got a World Series ring from doing Atlanta Braves baseball. So
how about that?
It's easy to forget some of those stops when you've had as many as I've had. Yeah. But I think the 18 years at CBS is that sort of took me to another level.
Yeah.
So I credit that position with taking my career to another level. And thankfully, Fox has been there. They've been a godsend to me. And I'm finishing up my 10th year with them.
Wow.
I can't believe it's been 10 years.
That's great.
So
it's amazing, Tim. I always tell people one thing that always impresses me in sports, especially coaches, is staying power. Guys that can stay. We talked a little bit off the air about Jim Boeheim, Jim Calhoun we mentioned. Guys, Tom Izzo's done it. There's a lot of guys have done it. But the guys that had the ability to just I call it staying power. And you've had that. You've had this career, whether it's been with Fox or ESPN or CBS and, all the things you just mentioned. You have been able, it's like you're very, very good at what you do. You're very, very knowledgeable, but you've also been able to kind of keep surviving through the changing landscape of college television or pro television and sports and cables and streaming now. And, you just have kind of found a way just to keep on going. And you've done it at a high, high level, which has been impressive. So, I always tell people, I've got great respect for you as what you do work-wise, but you and I have been friends for a long time. We played a lot of golf together. I actually came to Shreveport, Louisiana, your hometown, played
You did.
in with Hal Sutton and David Toms in an event you had going for a while. And I remember I actually won. I won a putter. I won this wooden, beautiful putter on a shootout there we had on the last day. So our paths go way back, a lot of different directions. So it's been a ball of fun.
Yeah, that was a charity event for Hal's pediatric hospital that David helped him with. And my daughter was working for the Sutton Foundation at that time. Tiffany, my oldest, she's now 41 and has 2 babies. We've got 4 grandchildren. Her son Spencer is the only boy that we've got in the family. Terry and I could not make little boys. We just had 2 girls. And 3 of the 4 grandkids are girls, but little Spencer, named after my buddy Spencer Tillman, who's been with me for the last 25 years, minus the first year I went to Fox. We've been in 26 years together for 25 of those. He's the namesake of our grandson. And then Amelia is 3, but she was working for the Hal Sutton Foundation, and she put that thing together. And we had a group of media celebrities that would come in and participate in the Tim Brando shootout, which was a part of that weekend to raise money for Willis. That was actually the Schumpert Medical Hospital, and they did not have a pediatric surgeon. And Hal's a dear friend and manager had lost a kid, unfortunately, because there was no pediatric surgeon at the time in Shreveport. So he remedied that situation through that event, and I met a lot of great golfers through that period of time. And as you know, I love that sport. I've not done as much of it as I wish I had. I did a little bit of the Masters digitally when I was there, and I did the U.S. Open for Fox when we had it digitally. But that's the sport that I really would have loved to have gotten into a little bit more. But that's a tough nut to crack.
Right.
Most of the broadcasters that do golf are either former players, former coaches, swing coaches, or architects. The very few guys that are just, quote, broadcasters get to broadcast golf. But I love playing it.
Right.
And as a type A, which I am, it humbled me, and I think that's probably the reason I love to play, is because it forces me to shut the hell up and realize that I'm going to suck at something, even when I think I'm good, But that was a great event. I was really glad you came.
We had some great battles at Steelwood Country Club just outside of Mobile, I think, if you remember that. But take me back, Tim. So you attended what I would remember. I don't even know if you know this or not, but I want to say that I was 86, 87, my senior year. of playing at Alabama. We opened the season, which I don't know who scheduled this game, but we opened the season at that time, it was called Northeast Louisiana.
Louisiana University,
which then became
the
University of Louisiana Monroe, which was your alma mater. So tell me about what inspired you to kind of get going into broadcasting. Was that always a dream since you were younger, or what?
Oh yeah.
What happened? Like what happened for Tim Brando to become a young Tim Brando that says, "I want to do this and I'm going to chase it"?
Well, unlike Joe Buck, and unlike Chip Carey, and unlike Kenny Albert, and unlike Ernie Johnson Jr., my dad was not, well, he wasn't nationally known as a broadcaster, okay? But my father did put the first 2 television stations on the air in my hometown. And my dad was the most talented guy I've ever been around that was in media. And I say that knowing that you don't understand what I'm about to tell you. We've never really discussed it, so this may be breaking news to you, okay? Because I've never gone in depth with it until somebody asked me about it. It would take too long. The seeds were sown for me when I was about 5 years old. My father was in World War II on a destroyer in the Atlantic. He was the communications guy, okay, operating reconnaissance in the Atlantic. But he wanted to be a broadcaster. And when he got out of the Navy and came back from World War II, he went to the Columbia School of Broadcasting, which at that time was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was going to do radio. He was going to be a sports writer as well. He worked for the local paper, the Shreveport Times. He was working radio at KCIJ radio, and he also was an entertainer. He was a singer, a crooner of the Rat Pack era type of crooning. He was really, really good. He formed together a band called Hub Brando and the Dreamers. Dream was his theme song, and Johnny Mercer's old song. And the lyrics in that song were remarkable. And I watched him entertain, and I wanted to be on that stage with him, and he knew that. And so we worked on a bit of a skit for me to get on, that I would be the little kid wearing the tuxedo that wants to be a part of the band. In those days, all show bands had tuxedos, red, blue, Think of the outfits, maybe the Four Tops or the Spinners might have worn as you were growing up. Okay, you remember watching them. Oh, yeah. Same types of outfits, right? With sealskin bow ties, and because Dad had a band, and because most of the band was young, he was involved when he moved from radio to television. When television first came on the air, there wasn't a lot of network TV. In fact, there was very little, if any. So Dad helped these stations. One of them, the first one, he was actually the general manager of for about a year and a half. The FCC they had a battle over ownership, and Dad was running it and putting together local shows for the television station. He had sort of a Dick Clark American Bandstand, only in Shreveport Bandstand type of show. He had a amateur hour, sort of a Ted Mack or Star Search with Ed McMahon type of show, only it was Dad's show. And it was called Hub Brando's Search for Talent, where locals could come out and audition to be on the show each week. Dad would always take the best of that group and offer them an opportunity to tour with his band. And we would play at NCO clubs, airmen's clubs, all around the country and abroad. We played at SAC Air Bases in Harmon, Newfoundland. We played in Goose Bay, Labrador. In the dead of winter, around Christmas, when I was 7 years old, I got to go in an igloo with the Eskimos. That you could get away with calling them that back then. And we had a blast. And I was part of the act. And I could also play the drums. I took drum lessons, and I could play Wipeout on the drums. I think the song was called Freeze. and I would go up and play the drums, left-handed drummer on a right-handed set because I needed to get on the big set to do it. And then I had a couple of what they'd call drum pads or, another form of drum that I could stay on the set with after that because I didn't want to leave. The bit was Tim would come out about halfway through the show, do his little bit, tug on his dad's coattails, and then my father would say, you got to audition. So we would sing Me and My Shadow. Okay. Me and my shadow, all alone and feeling good. And I was the shadow. And then we would do little Jimmy Dickens, a country star from the Grand Ole Opry, had a song called I was telling my dad he was too old. He needed some young blood in the band. And he said, well, these guys are all in their 20s. I said, yeah, but I'm 7. Come on, man. You need some youth. And so we do You're Too Old. Too old, you're too old to cut the mustard anymore. That was a Jimmy Dickens song from the Grand Ole Opry. And after we got through with that, the crowd kind of dug it. And I would con my way into staying on the set with the band. After I proved I could play an instrument. He said, well, you got to play an instrument. So I got up and I played Wipeout. And I won my way into having sort of a fake drum set to play along with the guys to finish out the show. But I had to join the musicians union to be a part of the act because you couldn't have a 7-year-old that was in a place where they were serving alcohol in 1962 or 3 unless he was a member of the band and he was a member of the musicians union. So I was the youngest member of the musicians union 116 in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Wow.
Not a lot of people know that.
How about that?
But I was. That put me in front of people, Mark, and that made me aware of the power of being confident in front of people. Yeah. And I was around, obviously, a lot of adults staying up late at night. We played in places like Bermuda at the Royal St. George Hotel right off the Atlantic Ocean. And there was a little gazebo there where the sun was coming up over the Atlantic. And, I'm with a bunch of 20-somethings that are, out of their minds drunk, and I'm singing and playing the drums and learning a lot about life in my youth by being involved in that. But my mom and dad, by the time I was 10 or 11 years old, my mom and dad were having some issues, and he was ready to move on. He needed to get out of Shreveport. He had done it all in this area, and he wanted to go to California, and he wanted to give it a go, see what he could accomplish. And all his dreams, unfortunately, didn't come true. But he lived vicariously by writing. He became a screenplay writer, wrote a number of episodes of shows that were sitcoms and whatnot while he was out there, lived in Toluca Lake, overlooking the Burbank studios there, not far from Warner Brothers. And he lived vicariously through me and another half brother of mine that he had in a marriage that followed. And so his dreams, as I said, did not all come true for him, but they did for me.
Right.
And I think that by the time I was about 9 or 10 years old, I knew I wanted to be a sportscaster. I knew I wanted to be the next Kurt Gowdy. That was my hero. Growing up watching college football and college basketball and all the guys that were doing games, man, that was incredible to me. And that's what I wanted to do. I was a decent enough athlete. And when mom and dad separated, this is kind of a neat thing about when parents do break up, it can cause irreparable damage to many. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure I had my moments where I was affected adversely. But my memories of it are that when dad was gone, I had to suddenly not be a stage kid, but be a regular kid. Mm-hmm. I had to make that transition and be like one of the guys, not the young kid that was on TV saying all eyes on me in the spotlight. So how do you do that? Well, you do that by making the teams. You got to be a decent enough athlete to make the teams, especially in the 60s in the South. And I wasn't the greatest athlete, but I was good enough. And I certainly had the confidence. I had that instilled in me. My father raised me to be a believer in myself and that I could get this done. I was very fortunate that my mother was a strong competitor and a great athlete. I think I inherited that part of my ability from her. And her brother, my uncle, was a great baseball player. I mean, a great baseball player. Could have been a minor league player, but he chose to start working. He had gone to Mississippi College over in Clinton for a period of time outside Jackson. But he decided to come back and go to work in Shreveport, working for a man that lived right across the street from us, whose son was an all-state basketball player at Fair Park, my high school in 1963. Jimmy Pruitt was his name. Well, my uncle, Richard, was, as I said, a great athlete, and particularly in baseball. And I could pitch. I was left-handed. I could hit with occasional power. I think my media bio, if it had ever been written, would have been Tim Brando, slow white left-hander with occasional power, can go deep, will never get a leg hit. Never get a leg hit. But my uncle worked with me. He worked with me on my pitching. He worked with me on he was like the big brother I never had. He was about 10 years older than me and 10 years younger than my mom. So it was a perfect bridge, really. And he was, in a lot of ways, replacing my father on a daily basis as that influence athletically. And he never missed any of my games. Dad came back as often as he could, and Dad stayed in touch. I mean, it was a hard breakup, and it was really hard on my older sister. It was really hard on my younger brothers because they tried getting back together a couple of times, didn't work out. But they loved each other. My mother never remarried. But I made contact with Dad, and Dad did everything he could to get back close to me. He got involved because he was still in the entertainment business to some extent. He had a band, and he had dates in these hotels that had stages. He still had a little bit of a show band, and he got involved with his company that was buying up these hotels, and they bought one over in Monroe, Louisiana. And it was the Admiral Benbow Inn in Monroe, Louisiana on Louisville Avenue. And Dad got a piece of that, minor ownership, but a piece of it. And he used it as a means to come home and be near us and to get closer to me as I was going into high school. He wanted to be able to see some of my games. I was playing high school baseball, American Legion baseball, and I was serious about it, but I also was serious about being a broadcaster. And in middle school, I was actually 14, so it was ninth grade. You know, in those days, junior high was 7, 8, 9, high school 10, 11, 12. All right. So in what would have been my freshman year of high school, ninth grade year of middle school or junior high, a friend of my father's that knew his background, knew that he was a television and radio legend in Shreveport, came into the doors of the Admiral Benbow Hotel in Monroe and said, "Hub, listen, I've got a high school football contract with Neville High School in Monroe. They are a perennial state championship contender. We just lost our announcer who got another job, and I don't have anybody to call their games, and I know you know how to call ball games. You've done it all in broadcasting. Can you help me out?" And my dad, knowing right away, okay, Tim is over in Shreveport. I'm 100 miles away here in Monroe. He said, "Yeah, I'll do that for you." He said, "That's Friday nights, right? You need me to do it on Friday nights?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, will you be here on weekends?" He said, "Well, I'm here most weekends anyway, but for this, I'll make sure that I'm here every Friday." And he says, "I'm back and forth between California, but I'll make sure I'm here every Friday." And he said, "I've only got one thing I need you to do for me." His name was Ollie Bales. He owned KLIC radio in Monroe. He said, "You have to let me pick my second banana. Okay, the guy that's going to work with me in the booth. You gotta let me pick the guy." And he said, "Sure, Hub, whoever you want to get, that's fine." This guy had no idea it was going to be his 14-year-old son, but it was me. So he called me up and he said, "Tim," he said, "it's the fall. I know you're playing football. He said, but I'm going to ask you to make a decision here. I know you really don't like football. I don't think you like playing it as much as you do baseball and basketball. I was playing all three sports back then. And I was better at basketball than I was at football. I remember this is the Jim Crow South as we're just beginning to integrate the schools. So in the 8th grade, we had won the city championship, Mark. I was like the small forward that started. But, you know, I couldn't play if we were in man-to-man. It had to be a zone. So if we weren't playing zone, if we weren't walking it up and playing zone, I got no shot. Well, they integrated the schools in the 9th grade, and I'll never forget my coach saying to me, Tim, here's the deal, son. We're going to have a little scrimmage here as the all-black school is merging with the all-white school. Both won the city championship, so you guys are going to have to play. So we had our own Texas Western Kentucky game in 1970 at Lakeshore Junior High, and this slow white left-hander knew he was going to be playing baseball the rest of his life, not basketball. So I quit playing football, and I did finish the 9th grade in basketball, but I quit playing football so I could get on a Continental Trailways bus in downtown Shreveport, take a 100-mile drive to Monroe. My dad would pick me up, and then we'd go to Tiger Stadium at Neville High School. Or he'd pick me up and he'd take me to wherever the road game was. It could have been in Bastrop. It could have been in Cotton Valley. It could have been, wherever the road game was in that district to do the games. And that's where I got my first experience. My dad would let me watch him call the play-by-play in the first half. And then in the second half, we'd switch. So I would get the finish of the game to call play-by-play. He would do color and I would do play-by-play in the second half. And you remember the name Jim Hawthorne. He later went on to become the voice of the LSU Tigers. Jim was at KWKH here locally and about 10 or 11 years older than me. And Jim heard me and he said, God, I've never heard anyone that age have the tempo of the game down. But I knew what I was doing. I had watched, and I was a real student of all of the play-by-play guys that I'd watched on television, and I listened to all the radio broadcasters as well. So I was ready to go on the air even then. And I never played football again. I did high school football after that without my dad, my junior and senior years over in Longview, Texas. He had another hotel that he had a piece of at the Roadway Inn in Longview, Texas. And I did Pine Tree Pirate high school football my junior and senior years. Now, I wasn't a part of the DE program. I did get to play baseball through my junior year, but Mark, I had all my credits until my senior year. I only had 3 credits to get out of school. And during this time, I was going to speech and debate tournaments. I was the editor of the student newspaper, the Powwow. And so I was staying at school all day, but I only took 3 classes my senior year. And I found out that you had to have 4 academic credits to be considered a full-time student. So I was ruled ineligible for my senior year of baseball, and I didn't get to play. And we had a hell of a team. We won district the year before. I thought we'd play for state. So I got screwed out of my senior year because and I was at school all day. If somebody just said, hey, Tim, you got to take basket weaving, I would have taken it. But it was probably a good thing because I didn't have any illusions of grandeur, but it made me concentrate on what I really wanted to do, and that was be a broadcaster. And I won a speech and debate tournament virtually everywhere we went to compete while I was in high school, including at Northeast. And they had a scholarship. They gave me 50% of my tuition was taken care of on a speech scholarship there. And I went while I was working. And
there you go.
I was working in local radio and in local TV when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. The whole time I was in school. And it got to a point where I needed to go ahead and leave. I never had a problem with a player going hardship or leaving school early because I did. I did because I couldn't afford not to. I couldn't afford not to. I was going to be saying goodbye to way too much money if I did. I literally a rock jock on FM, a sportscaster on AM, and I'm in my teens.
There you go.
Now think about that. The opportunities were just too great. And so by the time you met me in the mid '80s, I had been on the air
Right.
for 15, almost. I mean, really a long time.
Mm-hmm.
From 1971. Think about that. 1971 to now. That's 52 years that I've been broadcasting.
Wow. And
52 years.
How about this, Tim?
And so
and
that's a long time for a guy that's 67.
And when we played at Alabama in the SEC in that era, mid 80s, we were excited when you rolled in, because then we felt like, okay, this is a big game.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a big game, because Tim Brando is here doing the game, and I remember all of us talking about it. So jump forward with me, Tim. Now let's go, because I'm dying to ask you this. I'm dying to ask you this. So you've covered so many sports for different eras, coaches, sports, players, decades. We can go through all of it. We don't have enough time.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? I pulled this out just for you. Show you about my dad. This is a publicity shot, a PR shot of my father with his trombone.
How about that?
That was put on the cover of a 45 for Hub Brando and the Dreamers. You like that? You like that little cigarette?
I was going to say,
that cigarette that he's got? He's got it working, doesn't he?
He might. He's a mix between James Bond, Marlon Brando. Let's see who else we got there. He's got it all. He's got it all.
Got a little Sinatra, Vic Damone,
little Frank,
little Dino, little Dean Martin. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So,
okay, I'm done.
All right, so take me through this, Tim. I'm curious. So a lot of people that maybe aren't as young, or some of us and a little bit older will remember, SEC basketball in that era when I played in the mid '80s. You're talking about Kentucky with Joe B. Hall and Eddie Sutton, Dale Brown, Hugh Durham, Don DeVoe, Sonny Smith, Wimp Sanderson, Norm Sloan at Florida. CM was at Newton was at Vandy.
Hugh Durham at Georgia.
Hugh Durham. Who would have been at old Mississippi State would have been Bob Boyd.
Well, that would have been Bob Boyd. Yeah, hell of a coach.
Boyd. So,
hell of a coach. Richard Williams followed him.
But you take all those guys, and I love playing for Wimp Sanderson. We had so many great teams, but I always from a distance loved Dale Brown. I just loved Dale Brown. But for you covering that, do you see now? Do you see those guys had these massive personalities? Maybe social media wasn't as critical as it is today. I don't know. Guys weren't as guarded back then, probably. Yeah. They were a little bit more free and open for you to but wasn't it fun to get in, to just get to know all of those guys that were so big?
Yeah. And Mark, because they were all older than me at the time, and that was a generation ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And I had gotten to do some of those big games, those biggest games. Trust me, as excited as you guys were to see Dickie V or Bill Raftery and me or Larry Conley and me roll into town, I was just as excited to be there, and have Wimp in my ear, telling me, "I know you're friends with Dale. You know he did." He didn't just get John Williams with ease. You know that, don't you? Oh God, it was just the best. And they, as much as they threw each other under the bus, and they did. I mean, Sonny and Wimp, that was a show unto itself.
Right.
But Dale especially, because to your point, he was the outlier. Mm-hmm. There was no one like him. And because he was the outlier and he had all of this deep thought, a very well-read man, and also a sensitive guy, really sensitive, probably too much so. He could dole it out, but sometimes he was quick to react, negatively to anyone that would be critical of him. But I figured out why, after I got to know him. He was a kid that was basically fatherless his whole life. He lived in shotgun housing in Minot, North Dakota. I mean, his story was rags to riches. I mean, it was literally that kind of story in small places too. He had to coach at places like in college. Even after he got through coaching in middle school and high school, he coached in Pullman at Washington State.
Right. That's right.
Then he went to Utah State. Worked with Liddell Anderson at Utah State. And he recruited such really outstanding players for Liddell. That's what got Joe Dean's eyeballs up down in Baton Rouge, who at the time really it wasn't the athletic director. He was an executive with Converse.
That's right.
Doing deals with Julius Erving and Larry Bird. And, he was sort of Sonny Vaccaro before Sonny Vaccaro, with Converse All-Stars and those Chuck Taylors. But Joe had a lot of influence in Baton Rouge, and he told Carl Maddox, you need to get a guy that's going to just jump through the roof to be in Baton Rouge, and not many guys will, but this guy will. He's been coaching in the hinterlands, freezing his tail off. He's hungry, So Dale came in there, and he changed things. And he also, Mark, was way ahead of his time in terms of player rights.
Right.
He really believed that name, image, and likeness should have been there long before we even knew what name, image, and likeness was. And that made him very unpopular with a lot of his peers. Yeah. I mean, a lot of other coaches thought, this guy's out of his he's out of his mind. This guy's crazy.
That's right.
And he caught it from every end. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because this book is just out. Another one of many, but Trent Andrews just wrote this book called Dale Brown Court. We had a controversy in Louisiana over Dale Brown Court, but Dale is 88 years old, just had his 88th birthday at Halloween. And when my dad died, which was in 1984, fast forwarding on him, right before all the great things happened to me. Now, I started doing these games in 83 that you could see on USA Network. If the Jefferson Pilot broadcast was picked up by USA, and I'm doing a Metro Conference game with Jack Gibbons or Steve Grody, he could see me in Burbank. And so for my dad to see that, it was like I'd made it. I'm 26, 27 years old at that time. And then he dies July 4th of 84, which was roughly a year before my biggest of breaks came. And I was heartbroken that he wasn't around. Dale picked up on that, and Dale became sort of an unofficial, sort of surrogate dad to me. He picked me up like you wouldn't believe, because I was one of the few sportscasters, just like a few sports writers, and you remember this being in the South, how college basketball in our part of the country suffered in terms of lack of attention from the media. The moment I got to Baton Rouge in 1979, which was Dale's first SEC championship year, they hung a banner for the first time in 25 years. He knew I loved basketball. And I stood out because I loved basketball. There was one writer, Sam King, and there was one sportscaster, Tim Brando, that loved college basketball. And he needed that. He needed other guys to stump for him, to say, hey, this is big. What's going on here is huge. Because he had big plans. He wanted to turn LSU into the UCLA of the Southeast. And he wanted to challenge Kentucky. He said, by God, we're going to beat them more than anybody has ever beaten them. And you know what? He did. Oh, yeah. He beat Rupp more than anybody beat Rupp before Rupp left. I think in all he had 18 wins against Kentucky in his 25-year career. No one comes close to that for that many wins. And until Billy Donovan came along and had that long and successful career at Florida, he was the second winningest coach in the SEC because of his tenure. He was there 25 years. He was the second winningest coach in the SEC the entire time he coached to Adolph Rupp. And this from a guy who had never been a head coach until he got the LSU job. How about that? So, but all those guys, CM, the wonderful gentleman that part of his claim to fame was that even Bob Knight couldn't piss him off. CM got along with everyone. Oh yeah. And Wimp, I'll never forget Wimp saying to me, I said, well, Wimp, we're talking about golf. He said, I'd just taken it up when I moved to Connecticut. I said, Wimp, I've taken up golf. I got some Ping I-2 green dots, and I just love it. And I said, do you play? He says, I just started playing. I said, well, does anybody on your staff play? Hell no. Nobody. You can't be an assistant coach at Alabama and play golf. Ain't going to happen. Didn't happen for me. Ain't going to happen for them. You play golf, you don't get hired. That's simple.
So
he was something else.
So I'm going to tell you
such great memories of that time. Such great memories of that time.
I'm going to tell you a story, Tim. I'm coaching at UCLA. I think it was my 4th or 5th year. I was there 7 years. I think it was after my 5th. And I get a call from Dale Brown. And Dale, he offered me a job. And he wanted me to come back and be as an assistant. And I'm sitting here at UCLA.
How about that?
And Dale, we competed again, but I was a player at Alabama. So my teams, as a player, we competed against him. But he really was unbelievable. I remember him talking to me and saying, "I see things in you, Mark." I mean, he had such a way, or still does, of motivating and making you believe. All of a sudden, I'm believing that I'm the best assistant coach on the planet Earth that he could ever hire. And it pained me to tell him no. I ended up telling him no. I stayed at UCLA. We won the national championship. But I always remembered him for that. And then we, through the years, through Johnny Jones and all the guys, I was able to get to know him a whole lot better. But those personalities in that era, Jim Farmer and I just spent the afternoon in Birmingham with Coach Sanderson, who we played for. And after about 4.5 hours, Timmy, we stand on the front porch, and there wasn't a dry eye left between Jim and I and Coach. And, he's 86, and he's in phenomenally great shape, mentally sharp, does just everything. But, he's still we're sitting in the living room, and in 87, we lose to Providence in the Sweet 16, Rick Pitino, Billy Donovan, and it still pained him. He said, "Guys, I just don't think I had you ready." He said, "Y'all had them earphones in." He said, "Y'all just got some brand new earphones." I said, "Coach, I don't think the earphones had anything to do with that game." But he was in his mind. He was still. He just wanted to figure out how he could recoach that game, because that happened.
Well,
but
Mark, there was a period in there, and I think even Dale and I had this conversation talking about Wimp. Because, it meant more then, I think, than it does now. But one of the great things about college basketball is taking a team, and you experienced it because you got Alabama to the Elite Eight, which Wimp never did. The closer you get to the Final Four, the bigger the moment, the bigger the stage. But when you get to the summit, when you get to the Final Four, and if you happen to get back there a second time, it just raises the bar, and so many more people are aware of what you've done and the way you've done it. And Dale was quick to point out to me his misgivings and things that he wished that he had done differently, that he had done better. But at the same time, there was that always with Dale a sense of great accomplishment, because getting to that Final Four. And doing it twice, and doing it, he should have done it 3 times in 6 years. He went in 81. The 86 team was an incredible story from an 11 seed. At the time, it was the lowest or the lowest seed to ever make it to the Final Four. It's since been tied. George Mason did it, and somebody else too. But when you think of the 87 team that lost when Fess Irvin missed the front end of a 1-and-1 against Indiana, if LSU had played in that Final Four in 87 in the Superdome, Mark, the way they were playing,
watch out. Yeah,
I'm telling you, that could have that lost tonight, especially because of Bob. Bob and Dale went at it, and Dale never got a chance to beat him. But to your point about the coaches in those moments, Dale said of Wimp, Tim, there was a period there I could not go into Tuscaloosa and win. Well, I had a better chance of winning in Lexington, and he did. He won in Lexington more than he did in Tuscaloosa.
How about that?
He could not beat Wimp. Even Shaq, he took great teams in there. I think he won once with Shaq, with Shaq in there. And even his great teams, when they came to T-Town, you guys always got them. You did. And he said,
great games.
Tim, Wimp Sanderson, for a period of about 5 years, was probably the best coach in the SEC. He just didn't get the love step, because he didn't get past the Sweet 16.
That was it. And how about this, Tim?
I think that's true. I really do.
How about this? We're sitting in the living room with Coach Sanderson, and and we're both, obviously very supportive of Alabama now. Nate Oates doing a great job, but Wimp, and as you get a little bit older, and he's like, well, hold on now, man. Oh, my team's and your team's now, Mark. You guys went to the Elite Eight now, and so we went back and forth. But he reminded me, he said, people forget 10 out of 12 years that he coached at Alabama, 10 of his 12, he made it to the championship game of the SEC tournament. Now, I didn't even realize that. I sat back on the couch like, wait a minute, I didn't realize that. Like that feat in itself to get to the championship game was so anyway, those guys were terrific.
Mark, let me tell you one thing. I didn't call the game. I wish I had, but I was doing in that period. I was doing both ACC and SEC for ESPN. This is like 90, 91. It was the year Arkansas went to Denver and lost. So it must have been 90 or 91, right in there. That year, I was coming from the ACC tournament in Charlotte, where I'd done the first couple of rounds. I'm coming in to do the finals. I'm going to call the finals for ESPN of the SEC championship. And I got there in time to watch the semifinal game between Arkansas and Alabama. Now, think about the talent on the court that day.
Loaded.
Hollywood Robinson, all right, Ori,
McDyess,
Latrell Sprewell, McDyess. That's all Alabama.
David Benoit.
Arkansas's got they got the Mayday. You got Mayberry and Day. You got the big kid that could really stroke it. Trying to remember his name now. Oliver. Was it Oliver Miller?
Oliver Miller.
Trying to think if it was Oliver Miller. Oliver Miller. Yeah, Oliver Miller. 3 first-rounders on the floor for both teams. 6 first-rounders, and they put on, I'm going to tell you, for a non-championship game, okay, not the SEC title game, but the semifinals. Right. For him to get that team to the finals that year, they had, and it was Pitino that was going to play him in the finals, ultimately beat Alabama that year in the finals. And it was because of that game was a war. It was like watching the SEC tournament version of Phi Slamma Jamma against Louisville in '83. Right. Okay. It was that kind of a game.
Right.
And you were breathless watching it. And in the end, I'll never forget James Robinson, who didn't throw the ball to anybody, gets caught in a trap, and he throws it to this kid whose name I wish I could remember, but I can't. But it was a wide open, about baseline extended, about 18 feet out, and he just nothing but net to win the game. And I want to say it was an overtime. I want to say it was an overtime game, and it was like 92-90. It was just, oh, my God, one of the most incredible games I remember. And I just sat there watching it going, wow, I don't know if these guys will have anything in the tank left, for the next game. So that might have been 92 now that I think about it. It might have been 92, not 90, because I think that Kentucky team was the team that lost to Duke in the regional finals in the Leitner game. Right. Now, the Leitner Amanu Timberlake stomp on the chess game. Oh, yeah. I'll always remember that.
So Timmy, let me jump forward. Now, here's one thing I've been dying to ask you, because I think there's so much attention right now with obviously the changing landscape. I think college athletics. Here you go. You've got the NIL, which we've touched on, and that's a whole new era of a lot of people having opinions about it. Then you have this transfer portal. Then you have conference realignment. I sit here in Newport Beach, California, and obviously I coached at UCLA 7 years. We won a national championship. But to think of UCLA and USC departing what I knew as the Pac-10, which was once the Pac-8, the Pac-10, and then became the Pac-12, and they depart and go to the Big Ten, and then Washington and Oregon, follow suit. But I look at the NCAA, Tim, and I wonder sometimes if truly the NCAA is here to stay forever. I don't know. Maybe it just seems to me everything seems to.
I don't think they are.
The landscape changes so much. Conference commissioners now are so powerful. We're ultimately going to get to about 3 or 4 power leagues, if we're not already there, kind of. So what's your take on if you had to look down into a crystal ball and say about the NCAA, what would you say? That are we gonna know them in 10 years like we know them today?
We were talking about them earlier. All right, Dale Brown took on the NCAA like no one else this side of Jerry Tarkanian. Okay, and he had the goods on the NCAA over the Lester Earls situation that helped usher him out at LSU. It did. He was convicted on the spot by the court of public opinion over a kid that was clearly lying, and then said as much when he was interviewed in the aftermath of it. Get this book, if for no other reason. I'll make sure you get it because you need to read it. The kid, he was coerced and he lied. And that's what the NCAA always did. If they had you as someone they were going to get, in those days it would have been David Burst, who was going to come after Tark no matter what and use any means to get him, that he was going to get him. Simple as that. And they had been empowered by what had happened with SMU, with the Pony Express in the early 80s. And they felt like they were judge and jury, and they did not have to answer to quote unquote due diligence or hearing another side of the story. If they wanted to get you and they had you, you were done. You were cooked. Tarkanian, as you know, won a landmark lawsuit and was paid millions. Dale could have done the same thing. Mark, he could have done the same thing. And he had the goods on him, and he could have, after 25 years, said, you know what, I'm going to go get my money too. And he chose not to. And I'll tell you why he chose not to. Because he lived it, and he loved Baton Rouge, and he was very comfortable with all that he had accomplished at the end. And he wanted to continue to help people. You know, Dale is like a Father Flanagan type. He would go down into New Orleans, find some kids, and he would bankroll kids' educations with his foundation. Joyce Walker was a great women's player. You might remember that name from the 80s that played at LSU on the women's side. And she did not get her degree. She didn't finish, and she came back after playing internationally, but there was no women's league to play in, no way for her to make any money. She needed to come back to school. Dale paid for her way. He funded the rest of her education. There are classic examples of this, things that he wanted to do. And he felt like if he went after the NCAA, he might get his money. But what would that do to the LSU community? How would they feel if all of a sudden he won? Look at that. He got all this money, but he was already getting grief while he was coaching at LSU because he was always in the line of fire, you know, calling them Gestapo bastards and, you know, things that no one else would say at the time. But he chose not to. And I think he's lived a much more comfortable life because he didn't. But at the same time, some new people within the NCAA, when Mark Emmert took over, who was the past president at LSU, now Mark didn't do a lot of things well as president of the NCAA. He did not. Okay, he was the ultimate bureaucrat that didn't do very much good. But he did listen to Dale on a number of fronts. For instance, making sure a player can go home to see his sick parents without having to worry about the school paying his way. Those were issues of human dignity that the NCAA was legislating against. Dale wrote a list of about 45 circumstances where he felt the NCAA was legislating against human dignity. And he got about 30 plus rules changed that affected literally thousands of young men and women, okay, that without that help would never have seen those rules change so they could go and see people and have their airplane tickets paid for, you know, things like that. God bless him for doing that. God bless him for the things that he did for humanity. But those issues within the NCAA construct, Mark, they've not changed. Okay? They are a neo-colonial outfit that operates with its own set of rules. And forget the fact that they've been operating outside the Sherman Act forever, since the beginning of time. Walter Byers, all of them, they were absolutely making all that money and doing what exactly? with all that money, padding their wallets. And the one thing they still do well is their tournament, their men's basketball tournament. They know how to run it, and they've run it well. It's been incredibly successful.
It has.
It funds all of the non-revenue producing sports championships and has made them, it's the only financial impact that they get out of athletics, because football was lost in the 1984 lawsuit brought to the Supreme Court, won by the universities of Georgia and Oklahoma. I cannot tell you how many times, Mark, I have to tell football helmet heads, you have no idea. The NCAA should have no jurisdiction over football whatsoever. They're like, what do you mean? I said, well, they don't make any money on it. They don't control it. The television deals are done by the conferences. That's why there's an SEC network, a Big Ten network, a Big 12 network. And by the way, Mark, there wouldn't have been a Tim Brando hosting College Game Day in 1987 if that lawsuit hadn't been won by the universities of Georgia and Oklahoma, because cable television didn't have college sports live until that happened. And I was on the cutting edge of that. That's part of what made my timing, my calendar so beneficial, was up until that time, guys like Jim Simpson and Bud Wilkinson would go in and do a football game, and they tape it and run it the next day on ESPN, because they couldn't run a game live in those days because the NCAA owned the rights to it. So I think that what's happened in the past year, especially with NIL and the transfer portal, all things that the NCAA kicked the can to the curb on and did not act upon, and they put the sport in peril as a result. And by the way, Supreme Court weighed in again. 9-0 against the NCAA when they tried to go after NIL and the O'Bannon case. You were there. You were with Ed. You know exactly what that was all about. Think about this. And what other body could bring the Supreme Court together for a 9-0 vote other than the NCAA?
No question.
So we know that they have no business in governance in any aspect of college sports, college football or basketball. But I think because of the money and the current television contract with Turner and CBS, they will be in business in basketball until 2032. After that, I think they're done. And I think the first thing that these commissioners need to do, and I sincerely hope this happens, particularly in the wake of everything that Tony Petitti, who was a boss of mine at CBS, he was an executive producer that I worked for 9 years. Tony Petitti was put in a pickle over the so-called Spygate situation with Harbaugh because the NCAA couldn't act on it. They are corrupt, and in addition to being corrupt, they're inept. They can't get an investigation done. And you have to send a notice of allegations. It takes 90 days once you send the notice of allegations. So it's embarrassing. So what did they do? The NCAA's enforcement and infractions people, mark it down. They were back channeling this story through the media, giving them all the leaks on the Harbaugh situation to coerce the head of the Big Ten, to coerce Petitti into doing something. Wow. Okay, to do something. And that's why this thing happened with Harbaugh. And I think ultimately the lesson that's going to be learned from all of this, because I have great respect for Tony Petitti, and I have great respect for Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, who tutored under arguably the best, Mike Slive. I really believe that you are going to see the commissioners of college football, led by Sankey and Petitti. Mike Oresco is another great one with the American Conference, and Brett Yormark is sharp. This guy running the Big 12, he's really sharp. They are going to form a coalition that will take governance of the game over. And by that I mean don't let a soccer coach have anything to do with football rules or basketball rules. I want one national body of officiating. Okay, one body. I don't need supervisors of officials in one league to the next league to the next league to the next league who can have this undercurrent of my guy and their guy that are officials going to a final. But we don't need any of that. Right. We need to remove the veil of impropriety. And to do that, those people that are running the sport, the commissioners of those leagues, they need to take it over and put in place people they trust to execute rules and regulations on the field, rules and regulations off the field. And the sooner they do that, the better things are going to be, because there's too much money to lose, Mark. Way too much money to lose if you allow an antiquated body like the NCAA to have any power whatsoever.
Well,
that's my view on all of it.
I think you're 1,000% correct. And I would say, Tim, 3 things popped to my mind as you were talking. Number one, the NCAA basketball tournament is alive, well, strong. It's the greatest show on earth. And a big part of that, to me, is because of Dan Gavitt. Dan Gavitt is the best thing that's ever happened to the NCAA basketball tournament. He runs the tournament better than anybody ever thought he would. That's one. Number two, Tark had it right years and years ago when he said the NCAA will investigate Kentucky and decide to put Cleveland State on probation because they're the schoolyard bullies. And I've always said the NCAA, and I've had my run-ins with them, and, we had a couple guys come on campus during COVID, and, I felt like O.J. Simpson, next thing you know, they're whacking me over a jaywalking thing. But the reason is your schools that can financially fight them, that can pony up the money. North Carolina basketball and sports when the academic scandal, or Kansas, you name them. If you have the financial means to fight them, you can beat them. Small Division I schools can't. They don't have the commitment nor the finances to. So the NCAA likes to take those guys. I always tell people it's like in a school. It's like the playground in the fourth grade, and there's this big, strong kid over there. They don't mess with that kid. They like to mess with that little guy that's kind of chubby and glasses, and he has his pencils in his shirt pocket. They like to get him. That's who they want to get, and they like to get that guy. But again, I just think that and then the last thing I would say is I would say the NCAA's arrogance towards paying players. When you talk about it, when you hear that number, $1 billion, we have a television contract for a 3-week tournament that's $1 billion. It doesn't take very long for the players to look around and go, wait a minute, do we get any of that? Yeah. And so I think all those things combined, I think all those, in my view, those things are all true. So we'll see.
Well, listen, all the doom and gloomers, and a lot of them are my age and older, Mark. Why aren't they playing for Old State U? We've lost that. Well, let me tell you something. my favorite, the thing I love about college athletics, and it is different. Yeah, they are making money now. But isn't that what it's supposed to be about? Aren't we supposed to put these young men in a position to do well after their playing days are over, or maybe help them have better, more profitable days during their professional playing days? All of this is part of it. I see so much good that comes from NIL. I mean, I see it. The quarterback that's making $2 million can take his offensive lineman out, buy him some Apple Watches, and take care of him for dinner that night. What's wrong with that? No. There's nothing wrong with that. That's building relationships. That's what that's what it should be about.
It's life.
It's life. And in the final analysis, all of that revenue that's coming in, that's generating so much with expansion, people think, well, but you know what? There's no room for the little guy. Yeah, there is. There is some room for the little guy, but we need to nurture that little guy by having the commissioners of those big conferences that understand we can't fulfill a schedule if we don't have a Sun Belt, if we don't have an American, we don't have a Mountain West. We need those guys to be in business. So let's make sure that we take care of them, because these games that are happening on Saturday are just too good. We can't let that go. And the money, the profits are so big. Mark, college football is by far and away, by a long shot, the second most popular sport in America.
Period.
Major League Baseball doesn't come close. NBA regular season games doesn't come close. Even the NBA postseason, you see what the NBA is doing now. They're having an in-season tournament to try to conjure up some interest, because there is none otherwise. So everybody, it's because March Madness could never be duplicated in May or June by the NBA, no matter how hard David Stern worked. And trust me, I know, I was working at Turner when he was trying to get them to do all these crazy things, usually with celebrities. It's not the same. College athletics is still the main girl in town once you get past the NFL. The NFL is a sacred cow. It'd be like comparing the Beatles to every other rock band. Okay? The NFL is the Beatles,
right?
All right, but college sports is like the Eagles, the Rolling Stones, the Who. You name all the bands, okay? I'll even go current for you. Fish, all right? I love Fish. I love Fish. Anyway, all those bands together, that makes up college football and college basketball, because of the tournament, because of the NCAA tournament, is a huge hit. Even though college basketball's regular season is not as popular as it was when you were playing and I was starting out, I do think it'll get bigger the sooner we get away from the NCAA. I do think college basketball's regular season will once again get some renewed life. But I could not agree with you more.
Yep.
And I hope I'm around to see
you will be. It's
some
coming.
of these changes that we're talking about.
Yep.
Because I'm telling you, I'm as giddy about what I do at 67 as I was when you saw me coming in to do that game when I was 32, 33 years old. In your case, it would have been like 28. I was like 28 when I met you. I'm not a hell of a lot older than you,
Well, you don't look any older.
Just a little bit.
You don't look older. That's one good thing.
Hey,
all right.
Makeup and just for men.
All right, before we go.
I was going to say, how do you do it, Brando? Makeup and just for men.
All right, before we go, I'm going to get you to commit right here that we're going to have a part 2, because we're going to dive into some fun stuff in a part 2 one day. You and I, it's going to be a lot of fun.
To.
But before we go, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We've got this thing going on here in the studio, which is so much fun. And I've answered this. I haven't put my answer out there yet publicly, but I will. But do you believe, Tim Brando, do you believe that Reggie Bush should get the Heisman back?
Yes.
There was a pause.
Yes.
There was a pause. There was a pause.
No, I do believe that he should. Here's why. Look, Reggie knew he was doing something wrong. So, that's the reason for the pause.
Okay.
Is because Reggie did know that he was doing something wrong. Okay, but again, it's a little bit like, Lakes, by the way, the guy that was involved in the house, the apartment or the condo or whatever they got for the family, he was really doing something wrong. But Reggie's a smart guy; he knew too. But I mean, I'm sorry, enough has changed now. It would be like the conversation with the Hall of Fame and Pete Rose to me. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, Pete Rose bet on his team, but he didn't bet against his team.
No,
he bet on his team.
Right.
He didn't bet against his team. He bet on his team. Okay, sure, he was flawed. Pete had some issues, quite a bit of baggage. But I know Pete. I knew Pete when he played. I knew Pete as a manager. Look, some guys can't get out of their own way. Right. I met the guy that could stop me. I looked in the mirror and I found him. Pete had some of that in him. Okay. But Pete Rose, are you kidding me? Why would he not be at this stage in the Hall of Fame, if not for a bunch of poison-pinned elitist writers that are part of Cooperstown? He should be in. Well, in my view, knowing now how we see what happened, for instance, Cam Newton, the Cam Newton story in 2010, I used it to apply to the Michigan story, a few weeks ago. Yeah, it wasn't cheating, but it was about eligibility. It was about could a player play. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Mike Slive handled that with a plum. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He knew the inner workings of the NCAA. He made sure that Newton was ineligible for one day, the day before the big game with Georgia. Mm-hmm. And then nothing was said. He goes on to win a national title. We live in a world of images and impressions. And let's just say that selective ethics is now allowed.
Yeah.
Okay. Selective ethics in today's time, particularly with the new rules that we have in place, are allowed. Mm-hmm. I can't unsee what the Fab Five did at Michigan. I can't unsee those wins Bobby Bowden got that were vacated for no reason, for no damn reason whatsoever, but they took them away from him. Mm-hmm. And I can't unsee that Reggie Bush was the greatest running back of his era, of his generation, and up until this point, the best running back I've seen since he arrived in the early 2000s on the campus at SC. There's been no one better. Mm-hmm. Okay? I mean, You think about the greatest running backs of all time in college athletics. Yeah, okay, I'll give you Herschel, I'll give you Bo, I'll give you Barry Sanders, and I'll throw in Jim Brown at Syracuse when he was also playing lacrosse, and I'm gonna bookend it on the other side with Reggie Bush.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those are your guys.
Mm-hmm.
So don't tell me that Reggie Bush doesn't deserve to hold on to his Heisman. He should get it back.
I agree with you, Tim. I loved your answer. And before I say goodbye, I want to tell you one quick one. You mentioned Pete Rose. I had dinner with Pete about a summer ago, maybe 2 summers ago in Las Vegas. And while we were eating dinner, I leaned over quietly and asked him about the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
And almost with a tear in his eye. How about this? Almost, because him and my uncle Mike Gottfried, and Pete are great friends.
Right.
So Pete's always been good to me, but
almost with your Uncle Mike too.
I know you do. It almost with a tear in his eye, Tim. Pete Rose said to me, he said, "Mark, I think they'll put me in, but it'll be after I'm dead." And he almost cried. It almost broke my heart. Enough time has passed.
Yeah.
The best hitter we've ever seen in baseball. Reggie Bush, same thing in football. You and I found a way to agree on a few things. But, Tim, I've loved it. This has been a great time with you. We're going to do a part 2 one day. And I've got great admiration for you, not only professionally, but as a friend. And I love you, brother. And just want to say thank you for coming on the front row. How about that?
You got it. And one last thing. I'm going to get out your way at some point for a game. I'm hoping I can get a date at Pauley. I do have UCLA at Villanova coming up in my basketball schedule.
Good.
Very soon with Raft at Wells Fargo. I think that's December 9th. But I always usually get the suits usually bring me out to Los Angeles at least once, usually to go by the Gale Center and also to go by Pauley, whenever they've got a home, when they're home and not away. Right. So when I do that, we're gonna play some golf.
There we go.
And get together and chat it up because and I'd love to see you, my friend, back on television too, because you were damn good at that. So
well,
we have that to talk about too.
Thank you, Tim. Well, have a great day.
I'll be your Agent Orange anytime. I'll be your Agent Orange anytime. You know that.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate you.
All right, Mark. All the best. Send my love to your pop and to your dad. To your dad and to your uncle.
I will.
Okay?
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.